All right. Well, good morning, almost afternoon. My name is Erin Colburn. I'm the Free Health Advising Coordinator for the College of Health Science here at Boise State University. I just want to thank everybody for coming to this presentation. One of my favorite people in the health profession field is Dr. Leonard Bell. And I love it when he comes and talks to you all. I think he does a really great job of sharing his expertise. He's one of the smartest men I know. And so I'm excited to let him present to you all about, I think, a very important topic that can help you in this process as you're researching your health professions. So I'm going to take it away, and you're more than welcome to go ahead and take your mask off if you want to. It's just me and Shannon in the room.
Thank you, Erin. Very generous introduction. I'm the smartest person you know. You don't know very many people, but I'm glad to be here. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. I've been here once before doing a presentation and at a couple of recruitment fairs. So again, I'm glad to be here. I want to talk a little bit about getting into professional school and some of the hindrances to that, and also how you can improve your applications for professional school. But I do like to get to know my audience a little bit, and I don't know how well this will work, but how many of you are interested in medical schools? Can we tell by a show of hands?
I know Eric is, and I believe Hannah is.
Okay.
Taylor, what are you interested in?
Medical school too.
Okay. And then Levi is interested in going to physician assistant school.
Okay. So medical schools and PA schools. Okay. Well, that will help. And what year are these students? Do you know? Juniors, seniors?
We've got sophomores, juniors, seniors, and postbachelors.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so I've entitled this Pulling the Curtain Back on the Admissions Process. What I want to do is to give you a little bit of an insight into how the admissions process works so that you can understand it and hopefully improve your application to professional school. So I want to start out by asking how many of you have ever seen The Wizard of Oz or are familiar with that story or The Wiz? Okay, a couple of hands here. So I want to use that as an illustration for this process. And I think about the Emerald City that our weary travelers are heading toward as the professional school that you want to get into. And so these weary travelers are headed toward professional school. And there are a couple of characteristics about these weary travelers. One of the travelers is the cowardly lion, and he's afraid of the process. He really doesn't know what to expect. Everything that comes along is a challenge, and he doesn't really know what the potential outcome is. And so as he goes through the process, everything is with fear and trepidation. And we want to help you navigate that a little bit today if that's where you are and how you feel about the process. Another traveler is the Tin Man, and he really doesn't have a heart for the process. He's really doing it for the wrong reasons. Maybe mom and dad were a physician or a PA or a healthcare provider. And so you're heading toward professional school because someone else wants you to be in healthcare. Or you're doing it because of the money or the prestige or the pride. That actually is part of my story, which I may share with you a little bit later on in the process. But some applicants or many applicants are involved in the process for the wrong reasons. Then, of course, there's the scarecrow. And the scarecrow really doesn't have the brains to make it to professional school. And this is actually one of the cold, hard realities that we have to deal with. There are some people who really, really, really want to be a healthcare professional, but they simply don't have what it takes to get into professional school. And so what I want to do today is help you think through what your realistic expectations ought to be. And of course, there's Dorothy. She's absolutely confident that she's going to make it. No matter what happens, she's going to find a way to get to professional school. And there are lots of these applicants out there as well. So they make their way to the Emerald City, but when they get there, There's the all-knowing, powerful, terrifying, and intimidating wizard that they meet when they get there. And I relate this to the admissions committee, because you have no idea what the admissions committee is going to do with your application. It is intimidating. You don't know what to expect, and it's terrifying. But here's me, Toto, the little dog who has accompanied them along the way. And he pulls back the curtain to reveal that the terrifying Wizard of Oz is really a gentleman behind the curtain, pulling some levers and pushing some buttons. And they realize it's really just a mechanical process of dealing with all of the applications that come into their professional school. And Dorothy says to her companions, that's it? That's all that the process is involving? It's really not that intimidating. Of course, the wizard says, pay no attention to that, because we want you to be a little bit fearful of the process. But in reality, the wizard or the admissions committee is really not that bad. You just need to understand what the admissions process is all about so that you can navigate it. So that's what we want to talk about today. I do have a handout here. I'll leave some with the admissions advisors, and that will be available to you. But there are a couple of cold, hard realities that you need to deal with. One of them is not everybody gets into a health professional school. There are always more applications than there are applicant or seats in the class. And the reality is that usually less than half of the students who apply to professional school actually get in. And I want to give you a couple of examples of that. So here's the table I've put together with the most recent data that I can find. And you can find your health profession of choice on the side, your favorite flavor, whether or not you're looking at allopathic medicine, which is MD, or osteopathic medicine, which is DO, or perhaps podiatry, another medical profession down here. PA is listed here. Most recent data I can find is 2019, and so forth. In the second column is the number of applicants to those professions nationwide in the years that I've listed here. And the third column is the number of seats that are available in all of the professional schools involved in that particular profession. So if you do some simple math, you'll see that the number of students that matriculate in those professional schools is, for the most part, at or a little bit below 50%. So about 42% of allopathic applications actually get in. It's a little bit lower for DOs. PAs is really disheartening. Only just over 30% get in. Podiatry is a little bit better. So some of you are thinking about plan B or C, may want to look at podiatry. And then there's a few other professions listed there. Then on the last column, you'll see the number of schools that most students apply to. And for medicine, many students apply to a lot of schools, 16. Osteopathic schools, about 9 schools. PA, most applicants apply to an average of 8 schools. So that's just some information to let you know that it's a tough process, and it can be intimidating and can be a scary process. So why would it be that only about half the students, or less than half, actually get into their professional school? Well, there's some obvious reasons, and those would be a low GPA. And by low, I don't mean that it's necessarily, you know, a 2.5 or 2.9 or whatever, but it's lower than the average that's needed to get into those professional programs. Or a low test score, whether that be an MCAT for medical school, or most PA schools look at GREs. It could be a lack of healthcare experience or shadowing experience. Could be a lack of a variety of other things that schools look at, and each school is going to have a specific set of criteria or indicators that they look at, and you need to discover what these are by looking at their mission statement, or calling their admissions department, or talking to students who are already there. Some schools are very interested in you having research experience. You get extra points, if you will, in the formula if you have research experience. Many schools are interested in you volunteering for whether it be a healthcare organization or otherwise. And they may even list the number of volunteer hours that people spend. Many are interested in leadership experience. Some are interested in other things that are a little harder to measure, like critical thinking skills, compassion, how well you understand the profession, and so forth. Another very important thing is communication skills. Now, these don't necessarily come up until you get your interview. That is a huge part of the process, but it can be revealed as part of your personal statement as well. We'll talk a little bit about that later on. So these are some of the obvious and even not so obvious reasons why people don't get in. So here's a question for you. Did you know that half of the students in medical school are below average? This is really by definition, and it's true of all professional programs. So my suggestion to you is when you are looking at your professional schools of interest, do not look at the minimums needed to get into your professional school, because everyone who applies is above the minimum. What you really ought to be doing is looking at the averages of last year's incoming class to see how you match up. Because if you match up with the averages of last year's incoming class, you are as good as half of the students who are already sitting in their class. Why wouldn't they take a look at you? So the question is, how well do you stack up? So I've listed here some averages for our university. Midwestern is a healthcare university. That's all we do is healthcare. We have an osteopathic medical school. It's called ASCOM. Excuse me. We also have a campus in the Chicagoland area, which is called CCOM, for Chicago College of Osteopathic Medicine. Here is our podiatry program, our PA program down here, and a variety of other health professions. And I've not listed all of them that we have. So OGPA is the overall GPA, and SGPA is the science GPA. So you'll see that the overall GPA for our incoming medical school class is a 3.53. Science GPA is just below a 3.5. Now, if you're looking at allopathic schools or MD programs, they are going to be higher. They may be 3.6, 3.7, 3.8, depending on the school that you go to. You will notice that our podiatric medical school, the GPAs are lower. So you saw in the previous slide or earlier slide that a higher percentage of students who apply to podiatric schools get in, but also their GPAs are a little bit lower. So again, another reason to think about that as a plan B. You'll also notice the test scores here. The MCAT for our osteopathic medical schools of 507 as an average. Again, allopathic schools are going to be much higher than that, generally in the area of 515. Now, I want you to look at PA, whoever it was interested in PA. You'll notice the average incoming GPAs are much higher than our medical school. For our students who are in our master's program, when we ask them what their backup is for PA, if they're interested in PA, they often say medical school, because it's easier to get into medical school than it is to get into PA. Now, these test scores over here are the average national percentages for the GRE in verbal and quantitative. You'll notice that for some of our programs, like our College of Pharmacy, they will accept any test score, not just the PCAT. The same happens to be true for our College of Optometry. I've listed here the academic average for the OAT, which is the optometry admissions test, but they will also accept any entrance exam. So the question is, how well do you stack up? And if you are at these averages, then you are as good as half the students already sitting in the class. And if you're below average, you may still be better than a third of the students who are already sitting in the class. But take a look at the schools that you are interested in applying to and ask, what are the averages of last year's incoming class? The second reality is that not everybody should get into a professional school. And this is one that's a little bit harder to get a handle on and get a grip on, because a lot of people have a motivation and a desire to get into professional school, but the reality is they may not have the academic ability or the personality or the persistence, and sometimes even the bodily coordination to get into a professional program. If you want to be a heart surgeon and you have difficulty tying your shoes, it's going to be a difficult row to hoe. So you have to think about some of these other things. And if you don't, the admissions committee will be doing it for you. And being in the health professions is not what it looks like on television. It's a much more difficult task, and it's not as glamorous. When you see your 47th runny nose of the day, it just isn't as exciting as it appears on television. So it takes a lot of persistence and endurance sometimes to get through the day as a health professional. So you have to be doing it for the right reasons. So let's pull the curtain back a little bit on the admissions process. And I'm going to use a medical school as an example, but the same process is true for virtually all of the health professions, regardless of what the health profession is. So let's use the example of a medical school who wants to fill a class with 100 students. And they may have 5,000 applications for that 100 seat class. This is not an unusual illustration. To get that 100 students, they want to invite 400 students for on-campus interviews. So they will be selecting 1 out of 4 of those that they actually interview. So they have to have some way of ranking or sorting through the applications, because no admissions committee in their right mind is going to actually read through 5,000 complete applications. So they're going to find a way to cull the most important information from those applications so that they can make it a little bit easier on themselves in reviewing them and deciding which individuals to bring on campus for interviews. So they're going to develop some sort of formula to evaluate those applications. I can almost guarantee you that it's going to include the overall GPA, the science GPA, and the test score for that profession. And then each school is going to decide what else is important to them. Is it how much healthcare experience you have? Are they going to categorize the number of hours of healthcare experience you have? Whether or not you have research, publications, maybe presentations at national meetings, volunteer hours, shadowing experience. Some will even evaluate the letters of recommendation and give a score to those. Maybe additional education or degrees. Have you done a post-bac program? Do you have a master's program? Some will evaluate leadership or awards. Some even look at the schools that you have attended. I really don't like some of these criteria, especially this one, because how do they know whether Boise State is better than Washington State or some other private institution that you may have gone to? But whatever the formula is, the staff is going to pull that data out of your application and plug it into some sort of formula and develop a rank of 1 to 5,000 for those applications that they have received. So this is the process. Now I've created this hypothetical formula. Please don't put any stock in this whatsoever. It's totally false. I've just created it to indicate that there are some things that are probably very important to them, GPAs and test scores. And some schools will give some sort of value to one or more of these big three, as I call them. because they will be indicators of success in their program. Usually GPAs will be an indicator of success in the first 2 years of medical school, the academic portion. The test score may be a better indicator of how you're going to perform on the boards. And so they may give more or less weight to one of those areas of your application. Some, depending on what their mission statement is, if they're interested in outreach to the community, may give more weight to healthcare experience or things like volunteering or shadowing. Some that want to be known as a research institution may give more weight to research, and et cetera, et cetera. But you will never know what their formula is. You can ask what kinds of things are important when you call their Office of Admissions. They will give you a general idea of what is important and what the averages are from last year's incoming class, but you will actually never know how much they weight any given factor. So the question is, do you have the right kind of balance of the things that are important to a school's admissions committee? And so I like to think about it this way, that some things are more weighty in the application, and they will be your overall GPA, your science GPA, and your test score. I can, again, almost guarantee that those three will be considered in all applications and will be the most weighty. Excuse me. In addition to that, there will be other things that each school will consider to a certain extent, and it will vary school to school. It's your job to do your homework and figure out which ones each school is interested in. So I characterize the big three on the left as the meat and potatoes of the application. I apologize for any vegans, vegetarians in the audience. No offense intended, but these are the things that are valued most important. The rest of the things in your application are multivitamins, and you cannot live on multivitamins alone. You need some other protein. You need some substance to your diet, and you do as well to your application. So if you are really strong in the meat and potatoes side of this scale, you have a good chance of getting into your professional program. If you are weak in the meat and potato side and very, very strong in the multivitamin side, you may not get into your professional program at all, because these are extras. These are things that supplement your application. So your job as a student is to strengthen the meat and potato side of your application as much as possible, and then add in as many multivitamins as possible. Those things like research, leadership, volunteerism, clinical experience, etc. So back to our example, with these 5,000 applications, they have now plugged in all of that information into a formula. They're going to send out invites. Remember, they're going to invite 400 for interviews. They may send out invites to the top 300 according to their formula. And they may not have even reviewed those applications very carefully. They're just doing it by the numbers. They'll send thank you, but no thank you letters to the bottom 4,500. These people just have not made the cut, so to speak. And then there are some who are what we call on the bubble. These are the people 300 to 500. And from that group of 200, they're now looking to invite another 100 students to the interview process. Again, these numbers are somewhat fictitious. I'm just trying to give you an idea on how the process works. These are the applications that the admissions committee is going to go through very, very carefully with a fine-tooth comb. And every admissions committee, again, will have their own criteria. How well did you do in organic chemistry? How many hours do you have in clinical experience? What kind of leadership do you have? What kind of research experience do you have? They're going to read your personal statements very, very carefully. How well do you write? How well did you put your thoughts together? And this is where the personal statement becomes very, very important, and your communication skills are really important. So the top 400 will then be invited for an interview, and the interview is huge in this process. You may be the 400th person invited to the interview and do extremely well on your interview. And after they re-rank the interviewees with an interview score, you may end up being the top applicant because you have done so well in your interview. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you may be number one on the numbers and bomb your interview such that you end up being number 400 after they do the re-rank. So practicing your interview and knowing what's in that interview and doing well in the interview is absolutely a huge portion of that process. So again, the school wants 100 students in their class. They've gone through the interview process. They've interviewed 400 people. So now they're going to send out acceptance letters, and they'll probably send out about 125. You say, wait a minute, they only want 100 students. Why would they send out 125? Well, the real reality is that if you are acceptable to our school, you're acceptable to other schools. And we're not going to get a 100% response rate on those 125 acceptance letters. So we may only get 50 of those 125 who actually deposit in our school. The other 75 will go somewhere else because they've been accepted to other schools, and we may not be their first choice. So now we need another 50 because we only received 50 deposits out of that 125 acceptance letters. So now the same process is going to occur. This time we'll send out 70 letters of acceptance, but we may only get half of those depositing, and now we need another 15. And this process will continue over and over in an iterative way until we fill our class. And some students will withdraw even after they have deposited. And so there will always be seats that open up over time. Because once they've deposited in our program, they may get accepted to another school that is really their first choice or a better choice, and they will withdraw from our program. And I can tell you that schools absolutely will fill their class by the time matriculation occurs. So there's lots of examples I can give you about schools that during orientation, students do not show up at orientation, and the admissions committee is on the phone calling the next person on the wait list saying, we just got an opening, can you show up on Monday? And students will come. And then there are other examples where students have gone through orientation and not shown up for the first day of class. And the admissions committee will be on the phone saying, can you show up at 10 o'clock for physiology? We have an opening. So they will fill their classes even at orientation and beyond.
Your
Because
advisor's nodding her head a lot. He's not kidding. Because students pulled off wait lists for freshman school.
absolutely. So if you're on a wait list, don't give up hope. They won't tell you where you are on the wait list, by the way. And some wait lists are ranked all the way through, and some just say, here are the next 10 students that you can take. But they will fill their class. So that's the way that process works. So as you're going through this, I want you to ask yourself a couple of questions. And some of these are going to be really introspective questions that you need to be honest with yourself about. So why do you want to be a physician? Why do you want to be a PA? Or for those who might listen to this talk later, why do you want to be a dentist or something else? When I teach a class on this, I do not list these options, but I ask the class this question, and then very often and almost in this order, the students give these responses. Well, I want to help people, or I like working with people. Well, if that's the case, become a plumber because they call you because they have a problem, they have a leak. You come and fix it. They are extremely grateful that you have fixed their problem. There are lots of ways to help people. Well, I love science and learning about how the body works. Well, then go into research and become a PhD because that's where you really learn how the body works. Well, a family member was sick, or maybe a family member died. That's a wonderful motivation for wanting to get into the profession, but it doesn't mean that that's going to necessarily be your experience. Your parents were healthcare providers. Okay, that means that's what you've been exposed to your whole life. And it was right for them, probably, but is it right for you? You want to give back to society or serve the underserved? Well, there's lots of ways to do that. Is health professions really the only way or the right way for you to do that? It's a respected profession and it comes with job security. Okay, there are other ways to do that as well. And you can go through this list. All I'm asking you to do is to be really honest with yourself and think through why you really want to be a health profession. So I want to tell you a little bit about my story. And because it's my story, and maybe you can relate. When I was 8 years old, I was walking down the street with my best friend. Let's just call him Johnny, because that was his name. So Johnny and I were walking down the street. We asked each other this question: what do you want to be when you grow up? That's what our parents always asked us. Well, Johnny wanted to be a car mechanic. I think it had a lot to do with the fact that his older brother, Victor, had a car in the backyard up on the blocks and he worked on it almost every day. It's what he knew, it's what he saw, it's what the people that he respected did. And that's why he wanted to be a car mechanic. I wanted to be a doctor when he asked me, but what I wanted was a DR in front of my name. I had no idea there were different types of doctors. I wanted a doctor in front of my name for the respect that I saw that people got in the community who had a DR in front of their name. So it was really a pride issue for me at 8 years of age. And I'm embarrassed to say that now, but that was my reality. Because the people with DRs in front of their name were treated better, they were respected, their opinions were respected more, and people looked up to them in the community, and that's what I wanted. So I went through school thinking about becoming a doctor. Again, not understanding there were different types of doctors. Went through pre-med in college and never let studies get in the way of my education. And that may be some of your experience. Maybe you've been involved in athletics or student government, or maybe you've had to work or been involved in intramurals or clubs or a whole variety of other things. I graduated in 3.5 years with a 3.0 GPA. Not very good, but I had a wonderful GRE. Why did I take the GRE? Because I didn't think anyone could learn enough in medical school to become a good doctor, and I wanted a PhD first. So I took the GRE to get into a PhD program. I was misadvised by my advisor, who said I could get into any PhD program I wanted to because of my good GRE, which was in the 95th percentile. So I applied to 5 PhD programs and was soundly rejected by all 5 because of my GPA. Remember the meat and potatoes? I had one of those test scores that was high, but the rest of them were not very, the GPAs were not very good. So now what do? Well, I found a master's program, filled the gap year, actually 2 years. And I did very well in the master's program because I made a decision that now I had to prove to myself that I could handle the academics. And in so doing, I also proved to everyone else that I could handle the academics. So in my master's program, I got about a 3.8. And then along with a good GRE, I applied to 4 PhD programs and was accepted to all 4. Now I had some decisions to make, and I went through a PhD program, did quite well in that as well. And now I had another decision to make, whether to continue on into medical school. Well, I graduated my PhD with my 1-month-old son in my arms, and I had to make another decision. Do I go to medical school and spend the time and effort in medical school and sacrifice some of that time with my son? Or do I go into research with my PhD and be able to spend the time with my family that I wanted to? And so I chose to make a right turn in my profession and go into research. And what I want to encourage you to think about is that it's okay to change your career goals based on your life situations. So I made several right-hand turns, had to do a master's program, and then decided to move away from healthcare and into research. And that's okay. You have to think seriously about your life situation, where you are, what your motivations are, and make the best decisions after being introspective about some of these questions. So some other questions. Is it really the right profession for me? We're getting back to some of those same motivations. Have I even considered some other professions, or have I singularly focused on the one? And then, am I a good candidate? We've already talked about this. How do you match up with the averages of the incoming class for the profession that you're interested in? If I don't match up very well, do I need to retake any courses that I've taken already? Certainly the ones that you have failed, you need to retake if they're prerequisites, or perhaps courses you've gotten C's in. Well, what happens to my old grades? Will the centralized application service or the school I'm applying to replace my old grade, or will they average them in? And for the most part, centralized application services now have all moved toward not replacing old grades, but they now average in the new grade. So it is not going to help your GPAs very much, or at least not as much as grade replacement used to. How important is research to my application? Do I need to make an active effort to find a place to get some research experience? And if you still don't match up very well, do I need to get some additional education? And maybe I need to look at post-bac programs and perhaps a master's degree. So again, does the school I'm looking at average my undergrad grades and my graduate grades, or keep them separate? And what do they consider to be science courses? Tell you a real quick story about one of my students who did not do very well in their undergrad program, but had done very well in their grad school curriculum. And they called one of the professional schools they were interested in and told them her situation. And they said, why would we consider your graduate grades? We have thousands of applicants who have applied out of undergrad who don't need to go to graduate school, who have done very well. Why would we consider somebody who had to take that extra step, who didn't do well in undergrad? And she was very, very discouraged. Literally 5 minutes later, she called another school and asked the same question. And they said, why wouldn't we consider your graduate grades? It shows persistence, dedication. It's a higher level of academic rigor. Of course, we consider your graduate grades. And so what school would she apply to? The second school. So every school has a different perspective on whether or not they'll look at your undergrad or graduate grades separately or combine them together. If you've taken your entrance exam, how well did you do? Do you need to retake it? When do you retake it? Only take it when you're absolutely prepared to take it, have enough time to study for it, and to show your full potential in taking the exam. But does the school that you're applying to average your test scores? Take your latest test score, take your highest test score, take the highest in each of the sections of your test score. Again, you need to do your homework and find out how the schools will handle multiple tests if you take them. Do I need more healthcare experience, shadowing, or work experience? What I'm trying to get you to do is think about sitting on the other side of the admissions desk, looking at your own application and trying to decide how would they view your application and what are the weak areas that you need to strengthen. So strengthening your application, be honest about it. Don't think that yours is the best one that they've seen, because it's unlikely that it is. So what are your weak areas? All of us have weak areas in our application. Be honest enough to identify them and then do something about them. So we've already talked about most of these things. Retake courses if you need to, get an additional degree if you need to. That's tough because right now an additional year or two looks like an eternity to you. When you get to be my age, it's nothing. I'm glad I took those 2 extra years to get a master's degree. Do you need to retake an exam, get more experience, volunteering, research, etc.? Please be honest with your own application. Choosing the right professional school. Again, what's important to you? I'm going to suggest you create 3 lists for yourself. One list is what I call a non-negotiable list. What are things that I'm absolutely unwilling to think about? So let's say, for example, that your spouse or significant other lives in Idaho and you have to stay in Idaho. You are not willing to go to a school outside of Idaho. Well, okay, you have just limited yourself to an extremely small number of schools that you can apply to. But if that's a non-negotiable, then you have made a decision to limit the number of schools that you can go to. There are some reasons that are legitimate, but I'm going to suggest that you remember this is your career. Limit the number of non-negotiables. Hopefully there's nothing on your non-negotiable list, but if there is, make sure it really is a legitimate reason. The second list is, what are your preferences? Now, this can be a very long list. I'd prefer to live in Idaho. I'd prefer to go to a school that has a high board pass rate. Here are all kinds of things that you may think about. Certain types of curriculum or emphases that they have in their curriculum. Small class sizes, large class sizes. Where do they do their rotations? Do they have their own hospitals that they do their rotations in? Do they have options for rotations in rural sites and in urban sites, etc.? How expensive is it to go there? What kinds of facilities do they have? Are they up to date on their technology? Is it public versus private? Do they have scholarships? Is it a brand new program, which is provisionally accredited versus an established program? Do they have minority school options and specialty areas? Do they have different tuitions for in-state and out-of-state? And you can create your own list. The third list is, how do you match up with the averages of last year's incoming class? So as you're thinking about schools that you apply to, I would start with the last one, how you match up. And then, actually, I'd start with the first one, the non-negotiables, get those schools off your list. And then how do you match up with your averages? And then look at your preferences. And that will narrow down the schools that you need to apply to. Well, how many should I apply to? Some people use what we call a shotgun approach and apply to every school that's out there and see what sticks. That's incredibly expensive, time-consuming, and challenging. Most schools will have a secondary application. It takes a lot of time to put those together. We do not recommend this approach, but if you have unlimited resources, you may want to do that. Do I only apply to the schools I want to get into? Maybe you want to go to the school your parents went to or where your friends are going. Well, that limits your options, because if you don't get in there, then you're out of luck. Do I apply to all of the schools in your, only in your state or near your home? Again, not something we would recommend. We suggest that you be strategic and pick 5. Now, you may want to pick more, but this is a strategic approach. With the 5, think about your averages of last year's incoming class. If you are an average candidate for 3 schools, then you're better than half of the students sitting in their class, and you have a pretty good strategic advantage in getting into those schools. One of those, you should be better than average. Now you have 4 schools where you have a really good chance of getting in. The 5th school is what we call a flyer or a long shot. I want to go to Harvard. Great, I got into Harvard. But be strategic and think through this process very carefully. If you want to apply to more than that, great. But this is a way to think about it and to get started. Other considerations, get the right letters of recommendation. When you're thinking about letters of recommendation, you can get a couple of letters that all say the same thing. Great student, attended my class, got an A. And there'll be a lot of support for that part of who you are. Or you can get different letters that say different things about you that paint a broader picture of who you are. Maybe somebody who was the faculty member who dealt with your volunteer activities or your leadership activities and can speak to that aspect of who you are. Someone else who can speak to the academic side of who you are. Someone else who can speak to the clinical side of who you are or the research side. And when the admissions committee looks at these letters and reads them all, they get a much broader perspective of who you are than just reading 3 letters that say the same thing. Understand the scope of practice. Realize that there's more that you can do with your degree than just go to the clinic in the morning and deal with runny noses. You can get involved in research, you can get involved with specialty areas, understand what it takes to get into those specialty areas, work for insurance companies, get involved in medical sales. You can do all kinds of things with your profession. So let's say, God forbid, you lost your right arm. What else can you do in your profession? Sharpen your communication skills, improve your writing skills for your personal statement, and your oral skills for your interview. These are really, really critical parts of your application. And then think through some critical thinking and ethical scenario questions. I think your advisors can help you with this. People you're involved with clinically can help you with this. There are lots of examples on the internet, and people who are already in the professional schools can help you with this as well. So just in the last few minutes, a shameless plug for Midwestern. If you find as you're reviewing your application, you don't match up very well with the averages for the professional program of your interest, you may need a gap year or 2. Midwestern offers 2 master's programs, a 1-year and a 2-year master's program. The 1-year program is coursework only, and we offer all of the basic science courses you'll get in medical school. And we teach you at about 70% of the level that you'll get in medical school. And it's taught by many of the same faculty who teach our medical and PA students. In fact, our physiology course is taken with the PA students, so it's a wonderful measure of how you are going to perform against some other health professionals. The 2-year program is a year of coursework and then a year of research in a laboratory. And if research is something you think will help you gain admission to your professional school or help you get a better residency option after medical school, that would be something for you to consider. Our programs prepare students in a broad understanding of the sciences and become better applicants for professional school and provide you with some experience in the laboratory if that's what you're interested in. So people interested in not only professional school, but also if you're thinking about plan B and C and D, there's biotechnology and safety industries that you might be interested in, pharmaceutical research, and others. In our program, we guarantee an interview if you meet certain academic criteria, have a 3.0 in our program, and have an entrance exam score that's within the standard deviation of last year's incoming class. Our medical school now has special arrangement that if you have a 495 MCAT and a 3.2 GPA in our program, then you're guaranteed a seat in our medical school. We also have a Bridges program for underrepresented and minority students and disadvantaged students that have standards that are even a little bit lower than that. So I open it up for questions if anybody has any. I have a couple of minutes left.
You can either take your mute off or you can post it in the chat and we can read it.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you very much. It was very informative. My main question, you mentioned reaching out to different admission offices to try and get a better idea of how they're, not necessarily how they're weighting, but how they're gauging supplemental things in your application. All these places have pretty cookie cutter versions of that on their websites. Who are the best people to talk to get that information at the individual schools?
Sure, great question. I tease my students and say you can actually talk to people on these things. You can also look up their websites. I would call the Office of Admissions and literally talk to an admissions counselor at those schools. So their websites will always have a phone number, and use a fake name. I don't care. All you're looking for is information, and ask the kinds of questions that we asked today. So what was the average for last year's incoming class for GPAs, for number of volunteer hours, number of healthcare hours? How important is research to my application in medical school or PA or whatever it is you're interested in? And they will tell you. My suggestion then is to follow up with an email. Ask them if you can get their email address. Follow up with an email and say, thank you for your time. I appreciate the information. This was my understanding that this was important. These were the averages. Is that correct? They should respond to you. And if they say, yes, that was correct, keep that email, because now you have an actual hard copy of that information for future reference. If they say, no, that's not correct, what I meant to say was this, then you have corrected information. So actually talk to somebody who can give you those numbers. Most of those numbers are not going to be on the website. They're not going to list the average number of volunteer hours, for example. They won't tell you whether or not, they may say there's a minimum of 500 hours of clinical experience needed, but they may not tell you the average number was 1,200. So again, you're not looking for minimums, you're looking for averages. So the website probably will give you more minimums than they will averages.
Perfect, thank you.
I would like to ask that a little bit too. I think range is another great qualifying number you can ask for.
Range.
Range, like what was the lowest GPA they accepted? Because it's always above the minimum, but it at least gives you an idea of where the baseline of that average is, right? Like, okay, here's the average, and here's the low, and here's the high. Because averages are so hard to really identify where that low could possibly be. And the NP branch does it on the MSAR, so you can actually see the range for last year for all the schools. DO schools, they don't do that, but I know when you call and ask for the average or the information he's suggesting you ask for a range too. Because at least kind of sets you in a position, well, last year, someone had a 3.2 or a 3.4. Well, okay, I'm a little bit below the average, but I'm still in that bubble of opportunity. Especially if it's your heart school, you know, if it's a hard job. But then it also helps you decide if you need to make some changes to your record too.
Right. Could you all hear that?
Yeah, thank you, Aaron.
But also realize that the range may include one outlier that's low or high. And so feel free to say, this is what I have. Is that something that would be looked at, or do I need to, what areas do I need to bolster in my application?
I concur with all of that. Other questions?
So in your presentation, you talked about looking at schools and having negotiables and non-negotiables, and one of them you said was that the school is recently accredited. What would be, and with the new, there's seems like there's a lot of hospitals after medical schools that are popping up all over the place. What would be the pros and cons to applying to a recently accredited school?
Okay, so the question here was, in the presentation, I talked about schools that were recently accredited or schools that pop up. What are the pros and cons to apply to them? I want to make sure you understand that all schools that open up have accreditation, but they have what's called provisional accreditation. Schools cannot get fully accredited until they have graduated their first class. That's just the way the system works. So what are the advantages of applying to a school that is provisionally accredited? The advantage is that a lot of applicants are not going to look at those programs. And so the GPAs, incoming GPAs and test scores are often a little bit lower in those schools. And so if your GPAs and test scores are a little bit lower, you stand a better chance of getting into those schools. The disadvantages are that they've probably just hired faculty who have not taught for lots of years, unless they've recruited them from other schools. So there are going to be some bumps and hurdles in the curriculum. And you're going to be part of the process of helping to make that curriculum work. And so you have to be flexible and willing to work with new faculty and new resources and some technical glitches, and you just have to be flexible. At the same time, the faculty are generally really tight with the students, because you're all in this process together, and that can really be an advantage. So there are pros and cons to it, but a lot of students are just not even going to look at those schools because they're afraid. If for any reason those schools were to go under, because they are provisionally accredited, you can transfer to another school, and all of those credits will transfer to another school. We've had a couple of students apply to unaccredited schools that have popped up, and we strongly discourage that. And one of them actually failed, and none of their credits transferred. So you have to make sure they at least have provisional accreditation. Other questions? Well, I think our time is up. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I appreciate it. I will leave some more information with your advisors here, and also some cards. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. I'd be happy to chat with you.
There's a couple of really cool clips too from Midwestern University who wants to.
Some chip clips and some pens and some other information.
So I'll have it all in my office, and when I send out the email for reporting to everybody who RSVP'd, I will, you have the invite to either come and get it from our office or have me mail it to you. So let's give a round of applause. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And I have had a couple of students attend the master's degree program through Midwestern University and be very successful in getting into professional school after that fact. So I've actually seen the campus. Dr. Bell gave me the opportunity to come down and see it. It's beautiful. It's nice and warm. So if this is something that you're thinking about, please feel free to reach out to myself or Dr. Bell, and we can help support you. So thank you so much. You guys have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
So much. I was expecting a couple of people in person, so it's too bad that